G'day and welcome to Oly35mm, user-based, quasi-empirical, cheap and cheerful videos on Olympus Zuiko branded OM 35mm lenses in this particular case, and we're talking about standard or short zooms today. Now I have 5 of the collection of short zooms. There was a 28 to 48 f4 constant aperture zoom. There was a 35 to 70, a little cheap and cheerful, f3.5 to f4.5. There was a 35 to 70 f4 constant zoom. There was a, sorry, my apologies, that is the, that is the f4. There was the 35 to 70 f3.6, considered by some as the best of the cheaper ones. There's only one really expensive one. I'll talk to you about that later. 35 to 105, this fella here, which I'll show you in a little while, which is probably my favourite of the whole lot. There was a 35 to 70 f4 autofocus, which was basically this with an autofocus a motor bolted on the bottom of it, and there was a 35 to 80 f2.8 constant zoom that came out with the OM3, and that's the one that's the not so cheap one and will cost you probably nigh on $2,000 Australian. I don't have a copy of that. I have only ever seen one in a shop window when I press my nose up against the glass, and it's probably the closest I will ever get to one. I should imagine I can't ever justify that amount of money. There are also some other short zooms which came out with the Olympus OM 101 and OM 707, or in the US, the OM 77 or OM 88. If you are using them on those cameras, then that is fine, but they will not fit other Olympus cameras, and they also will not fit the Olympus cameras, the mirrorless cameras with an adapter, simply because they don't have a manual focusing ring on them, so you will not be able to use them on anything else except for the old film models that they came out with. So be very, very careful. If the units don't, or sorry, I should say, if the lenses don't look something like this, because the new ones were quite smooth in appearance, then be very, very careful buying them if you want to use them for mirrorless or other OM models. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I must admit, for film or for digital, but especially for digital, I find that you're better off with the prime lenses rather than the zoom lenses. I tend to use the zoom lenses for convenience with film. I honestly would never ever bother on digital sensors. I would much rather use the modern lenses that are actually out there. Now, it's up to you whether you want to. They'll certainly work, but it's just my feeling on this. So these models I will actually only be holding on to 2 in my collection. This 35 to 70, sorry, my apologies, is 35 to 105 at the back, and in the longer range zooms, the 65 to 200. So look, there's nothing wrong with these lenses. They're very, very nice, but they're not as good as the primes, and you really need to think about the value that you're going to get out of them. Especially with image stabilization on the modern cameras, you will manually have to set the focal length for your image stabilization, and this can be a real problem with a zoom lens, because as soon as you zoom, you're going to actually have to change that, and if you don't, your image stabilization will actually try and compensate for a focal length that's not there, and you may actually get blur actually put into your photographs, so be quite careful. Alright, so I have used this one with film cameras, this little 35 to 70 f3.5 4.5, and it's nice. It's a nice little lens. It's probably the least image quality out of all of the lenses that I've just shown you, really, but nonetheless it's still actually quite nice. It's a 2-part zoom, and it focuses down to 0.75 meters. However, it does have a close focus facility as well, so that's actually quite handy. And like I said, f3.5 to f4.5, 49mm filter, quite nice. The 28 to 48, f4 through to f22, and like I said, constant f4, 49mm filter mount, two-part zoomed or two-ring zoom, focuses down to 0.65 of a metre or 65 centimetres. 28 to 48 is a great range, and it's sharp. It actually works really well on film. I think it's probably a little bit average on a digital full-frame sensor, but there it is. If you particularly like one, and if you pick one up for a good price, then you'll probably be quite happy with it. Okay, in the 35 to 70 range, again, we have the constant aperture f4, so f4 through to f22, again, two-ring zoom, and it will focus down to 0.75 of a metre or 75 centimetres, and that is all. There is no close focus feature with that. There's a bit of a problem with distortion as well, I've found with this particular lens over the f3.6. So it's very nice, it's sharp. I have no problems at all with the sharpness, 55mm filter on there, but it does have some distortion problems that you'll need to correct in post-processing if you are using a scanned negative or, of course, a digital sensor. The f3.6 is probably the best value of the lot, 55mm filter again, not a real lot bigger, and it certainly doesn't feel too much heavier than the f4. And it's probably a wee tad sharper, 55mm filter, if I haven't already said so. Two-part zoom. It's a f3.6 constant aperture through the zoom range through to f22. That handles distortion better than the 3.4. Sorry, than the f4. I found this one has been a bit knocked around, I must admit. But if you can get one in good condition, this is probably the pick of the 35 to 70s in my books. Now, speaking of picks, this is my personal pick for short zooms. It's a 35 to 105, so it's a lovely range from wide angle through to a nice portrait. It's not constant aperture, which is something that can annoy photographers. It doesn't really worry me too much, but it's one of those things, and it is a shortfall, I suppose, of this particular lens. This is a push-pull zoom, so it's a push-pull, one-touch type zoom, and quite handy. It gives you an idea of the depth of field indications at the various apertures on this. This is an f3.5 to 4.5 to f22, 55mm filter, and this is the only short zoom that I'll be keeping in my collection. So it's nice. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, so we have quite a range of short zooms if you particularly want them, with quite a few different features, and in fact I'm not too sure if I said the 35 to 105 has a close focus feature on it as well. Sorry about that. Quite a few different choices. Here you've got 5. There is also the, if you can afford it, the 35 to 80 f2.8, if you can find one, and if you can afford one, of course, at between 1,800 Australian and 2,000 Australian dollars. Most of these you will pick up for anywhere between $100 and in some cases they can be quite expensive. The 35 to 105 I've seen quite expensive, about $350 Australian. But if you keep an eye out and you are patient, you should pick most of these up for around about $100 to $150 if that's what you so desire. So that's your lot for today. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.